Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar presentation, Self-Service VM Provisioning with SaltCloud, brought to you by SaltStack. I'd like to introduce you to our presenters. Our first presenter is Jacob Weinstock. Jacob has spent more than a decade as a systems administrator and engineer, primarily in tech, entertainment, and financial service industries. He specializes in putting automation to work to deliver secure and efficient services for companies like NetApp, Hulu, Westlake Financial Services, and Encore Hollywood. Jacob has been with NetApp as an infrastructure engineer for more than 2 years, working with technologies like SaltStack, Kubernetes, Docker, Istio, and many more. Our next presenter is Ryan Smith. Ryan is VP of Marketing at SaltStack and has been doing web, digital, and financial marketing for the IT, customer experience, and fintech industries since the mid-90s. He's a huge fan of any outdoor activity and loves technology. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to you, Jacob, to begin the presentation.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'm pretty excited to be here today, present this topic. This is a story or a talk about the journey that we took at NetApp as we went through some challenging troubles and figuring things out. As you can see, I'm an infrastructure engineer. I've been with NetApp for over 2 years, and the team I've been on, we've dealt primarily with core infrastructure type things. So we're talking DNS, DHCP, Pixie, LDAP. We also run a good sized VMware environment, maintain that, and provide additional services like config management and other kinds of provisioning things. And our story here, our journey is about how we saw a need and we were having trouble, and we were able to come up with some ways to solve it. And our journey was obviously unique to ourselves and what we were going through. But I really feel like there's some general engineering ideas and practices that can be learned from this, and hopefully they're of help to you in your journey and as you start to automate and use some different tools to make your job better. These are the big three that we learned, and I want to present to everybody here. The first one, focusing on the end user, the developer experience. We didn't learn this right off the bat. We started out thinking kind of narrow-minded and focused on our challenge that we had. And as we went through this process, we learned that the most important thing was the end user, was what our engineers were experiencing, and that we needed to reach out and we need to understand that. So focusing, and maybe even better word would be understanding the end user and developer experience is key. It'll help you be successful. It'll help your product or your tooling to gain longevity and to last and to be of value to your team inside and outside. And then the second one here is the best place to start is with the tools and knowledge you have, then iterate. So everybody's team composition is different. We were a team of sysadmins, engineers, developers. We were a conglomerate here. And we all had different knowledge, technology skills, backgrounds. And so we started where we were all at, and we came together and we iterated, we learned. Again, we went back to focusing on our end users, and we learned from their use cases, and we were able to really build something that was helpful. And we were able to learn and to grow ourselves step by step, not trying to go to Google scale right off the bat. And then the last one, our experience with SaltCloud, the Salt API, and even the Python API for Salt were really awesome. The community is awesome. All of these tools were super easy to use, very straightforward. Felt like they had great documentation. We were able to contribute back where we found holes and able to get help when we need help. And we just found it to be a real great experience. And so I highly recommend getting involved with the community, reaching out, and participating. It's a great community. It's a great tool. All the different tools they have are really awesome. So this comes to our story. When I started at NetApp, infrastructure engineer, one of the first things I found that we had to do was we log into our ticketing system, and we actually had VM provisioning requests. So developers were needing VMs, and we were the team that were creating them. And there wasn't a process around this. They would come in, and we would just reach out and ask a lot of questions, go to our VMware environment, provision things, make changes, add stuff, a lot of back and forth. And being the quote unquote lazy admin that I am, I quickly learned that I didn't like this. I understood it was needed, but I didn't want this to be a manual process. And not only did I not like it, but as I dug into some of the details about how often we created VMs and how often we got requests, it was quite startling to see the numbers. NetApp, obviously being a data-driven company, we went back and looked at it. We're using a ticketing system, so it was pretty straightforward to be able to jump into that and crunch some numbers. And surprisingly, it was pretty bad how long it was taking our team to deliver just a single VM. And you might be thinking to yourself, okay, what's pretty bad? Is this like a couple days, a couple weeks, longer than that? Man, that would be pretty terrible. Well, yeah, it was quite terrible. It took us, and I'm glad everyone's on mute because they're probably laughing. It took us 32 days, and this wasn't a number we were proud of, but this is what the data said. And my lead at the time, when I crunched these numbers, he didn't like the number, and he didn't want me to share it, but I started to share it around the company, and obviously in some talks like this. But this was a number, and it was pretty terrible. And so this drove the initial investigation and process into saying, hey, we need to change some things here. And so I was tasked with this, and my background was I've been using Salt for a few years, and I really liked it, and I knew that it could be of a benefit to us. But ultimately, I didn't, being the lazy admin that I was, I wanted to automate this, and then eventually I wanted to not even have to be the one to run the automation, right? I wanted our end users to be able to consume this on their own. And so our journey, and again, this will go back to the start where you're at and iterate. We started with using SaltCloud just as is. We took our manual process of tickets coming in, working with the end user to manually, create a VM from a template, give it the correct resources, any kind of configuration it needed, to integrating SaltCloud, which was really awesome. Again, that was just something that we would run, but we integrated SaltCloud, and we started using the maps functionality and all the different provider functionality in there, and it was great. We were able to start turning things around real fast. And so this is a huge, huge advantage, right? We went from over a month to being able to provide our end users a VM within a day. So you might think, well, that's still a long time. You're using Salt, why can't you just provision these up? Sure, there was some back and forth that took place. End users don't always know what they wanted because we weren't presenting anything to them. It was a blank sheet. They could ask for anything. And when you ask for anything, some things don't always work, at least in our use case. So there was a back and forth, but generally we could turn around in about a day, and we're using SaltCloud, so we were putting this into config management, and we could track these, and we could provision them and re-provision them too if people needed them. And we thought this was awesome, and our end users liked it a lot too. Then we started to get requests that we couldn't solve with SaltCloud. So at NetApp, we build a hardware product, and testing that hardware product requires a lot of resources and ephemeral type resources. And so we had a lot of custom homegrown apps that needed to programmatically create VMs. And so we started to see that a manual process of SaltCloud and us entering data and provisioning machines just wasn't able to meet the demand that we were getting. So we knew Salt had some really cool other functionality, the Salt API specifically. And so we said, hey, we're engineers again, and we're lazy, quote unquote, and let's figure out how we can make this better, automate it more. And we had thoughts already around how to provide this to our end users so that we didn't have to be in the middle of this. So we used the Salt API, and we spun that up, and we built a small little Python app to start to take people's user requests to start to provision. So Salt API, talk to Salt Cloud, that would go out and talk to our, at the time, single provider of VMware. And this was great. We moved to about 5 minutes. This RESTful API we built in Python could take people's requests, and it could spin out VMs really fast. This was another huge gain. I mean, if you think about it, going from 32 days to 1 day to 5 minutes, those are some massive gains. And we saw a lot of good interaction between the programmatic tools people were using to create these VMs to gain some real benefit in the processes that we were running. So we didn't stop from there. So this was, again, an iterative process, and we were learning. So we had built all of this in a single Python app. It had Salt Cloud in there, it had Salt API, it had all the Python code. But not all of the developers on our team were familiar with Salt and its workings. And so to help people get up to speed quicker and be able to contribute on our team, we decided, let's break out some of these pieces so that the people like myself who had more experience with Salt, we could focus on the Salt side, and then the other pieces of this service could be pure Python, and then the other developers without as much Salt experience could still contribute to that and help the project grow, but wouldn't have to know everything about the intricacies of Salt. So we broke it out, and it went from a single quote-unquote monolithic app to quite a bit more complex. We broke things out into individual services, and when we hit that, there was a huge learning curve there as well. So as we started to break things out, started to realize, hey, this was a single API, and we want it to still be a single API. We don't want our end users to have to go to multiple places. So how do we start to mesh this together? And API gateway was the first thing, and at the time Kubernetes had been out, I think version 1, that we started on version 1.5 or so, but we took to it and we really liked it, and it provided us the ability to present a single API just as we had done with our single Python API before to our end users, but to distribute it out, and then not only that, gain all of the wonderful advantages that Kubernetes provides. The redundancy, the scalability, the isolation of services, the ability for multiple people to contribute, ability for us to upgrade without any downtime, have lots of people contributing to release all the different services as they need. So if you'll see here in the middle, the purple, that's the Salt service, right? So that was running the Salt API and Salt Cloud, and we were using an external returner, a database CouchDB. So that's what you'll see there for the database. Then we also had other things. So on the right side, you'll see in yellow, the template service. This was what would hold all the different Salt Cloud templates. So providers and the VM templates, the data for those, that would hold those. Then on the bottom left side in blue, we had the VM service. This is where end users would interact mostly. This is where they could post to create a VM and to destroy a VM. And then on the bottom right in orange, our job service. So we were using the great asynchronous functionality of Salt to be able to spit back async jobs to our end users and then have them come back over to this job service and query the state of their VM being provisioned. The top left here, you'll see a green box. That's a Bootstrap service that we stood up. It helped people get different config management tools onto their already existing VMs if they needed it. And yeah, so we housed all of this inside of Kubernetes and we deployed it out. It was pretty great. We started to see a lot of traction. Again, going back to our numbers here, this This number didn't change when we went to Kubernetes. It just allowed us some to handle the life cycle a little bit better, but people were able to interact with it in a really good manner. And so this was here's our API, right? And so here's an example of some of the endpoints. And if you'll notice, this is pure JSON translation of what you'll see in the SaltCloud documentation for the YAML definitions for the different providers, right? So here's how you define the VMware environment that we were using. Nothing new, nothing fancy here. It was nice too because we could point our end users to the Salt documentation and then back to our API without any loss. They could translate those YAML definitions over to JSON payloads, pass those into our API, and provision them. And then here's an example of a profile, right? So these are the types of things right here that our end users didn't always know about. And so this was where we were seeing the big back and forth would go from. And users would say, hey, I need a web server. And then if you're familiar with this kind of a ticketing scenario, you would immediately say, okay, I need more details. And so you would start to ask things like, well, where does it need to live? How big does it need to be? What kind of operating system? How do you want to configure? Things of that nature, right? And so by building this API and providing documentation, we were able to point our end users to these questions right off the bat. So they would come and they would know where to start and they would know exactly how to start. They would say, oh, cool, I see these things here available and I'm probably gonna have to fill them in, right? And you have required fields, non-required fields. So the API could do that back and forth for you, all at the pace of our end users. So as we were going through this, we built this out. Again, just to recap of kind of the process we went to, we learned so much and we gained and we provided by the end so much value to our end users. Not only that, but we freed up a lot of our own time to focus on other high priority things that needed to be worked on. And a few of the things we learned about, if you come back to these three topics, right? Some of the things we learned about the end user experience was, before talking to our end users, we had a preconceived notion, right? We thought initially we went and talked to our end users and we told them, hey, you guys can already do self-service provisioning. Why don't you use SaltCloud? Hey, why don't you use tool X, Y, and Z? There's actually a bunch of them out there that can allow you to do this. And the feedback we got was interesting. They said, yes, we understand we can do that, but we don't have the time. We have deadlines, we have feature requests coming in, and for us to spin up and maintain a whole nother code base or to maintain new tools, it just wasn't going to happen. We couldn't do it. If they had to do it on their own, then they were going to do it manually because they had to focus on what they had to focus on. And that was kind of an interesting, eye-opening experience for us to be able to learn that. Oh, interesting. Okay, so end users, they needed more help. They needed something that was a little more polished and focused on by some other team, but that could provide some quicker and immediate value to them. And so again, that's where we figured, all right, well, why don't we write some, and this is what we did, why don't we write some Salt stuff, create a bunch of examples, point people to a repo they can clone down, add their things. Tried that, and again, it didn't work. And so finally, we learned that we should have learned in the beginning, just ask what would be helpful. And so we started to ask better questions and to think about from our end users side and to get them involved in the process. And that's what came, and that's why we ended up on an API, is because our end users said, hey, look, I already have a bunch of automation tooling that already hits a bunch of other APIs. Could you provide an API that would allow us to spin these up, spin them down, manage kind of the life cycle of this stuff? And we said, okay, yeah, definitely. But we didn't know that until we reached out and really focused on our end users, understood their use cases, what they were trying to do, and how they did it. And again, like I said, as we walked through this process, it was start where we were at. And none of us had Kubernetes experience when we started this. Not all of us had Salt experience. The majority of us were Python, but a lot of us were just Python scripting, but we never built an API. And so we started where we're at, and the things we built were they were buggy at first. They were hard to deploy. We had downtime when we had this monolithic to redeploy things a lot. We had issues. We ran into things within the Salt code base that we needed help with. So we actually contributed back to the a few different areas in Salt, but one of them was the CouchDB returner. We found that we wanted to be able to capture that data in there and then query it out. And so we contributed back to fit our use case. And again, going to that third point, the community was great. It was really awesome. They were able to help us and work with us really well. And we found the API documentation to be really good. We tried other config management tools and that were written in Python, but honestly, their Python APIs cannot compare to the Salt API. We really found it to be extremely straightforward and easy to use. Just some of the numbers, purely the amount of code it took to get off the ground using the Python API for Salt was staggering. We were talking about less than 20 lines to start using Salt in Python compared to over 50 lines in some of the other languages out there. We really found that to be pretty awesome, and we liked that experience quite a bit. And then some other features that are in the works or could be in the works for your teams if you find this to be interesting and do it yourself, right? If you're familiar with SaltCloud, they have this idea of maps. We didn't build out maps yet, but that's on the roadmap. Maps allow you to predefine a multi-tier app, and then with a single Salt call or an API call in this instance, you could provision the full app. So multi-VM, multi-tier things. We had built out a Kubernetes bootstrapping script actually, so that with two Salt calls, or excuse me, two API calls to the Salt API, you could provision a Kubernetes cluster of any size nodes. We wanted to move that. One of the plans is to move that to maps, so it would be a single call, and you could provision a Kubernetes cluster. We have a few different projects to reach out to different cloud providers, and Salt obviously already builds that in. One of the design decisions, obviously, too, around Salt, let me jump back to this picture here, was it has multi-cloud provisioning already built in, right? So you see here on the bottom, right, we had started with a single use case of VMware, but these are just a few down there, GCP, AWS, Azure, of the different Salt providers that are built, out of the box. And so extending that to work inside of our API here has been pretty straightforward and easy. So when people request other different providers, we're able to implement those in a quick and easy manner without changing our API, without having downtime to other services. And again, that kind of user experience is provided by Kubernetes, but also by the API that we built and around Salt, and it's been really awesome. So I do want to let's jump over here real quick. This is the example of the open API docs that we have for our existing service here. So you can see here's a bunch of the endpoints that we have. Let's start at the bottom here. So here's the important one that people interact with most, right? So we have our post for our VMs, right? So an end user can come in here, and again, they have this interaction and they know exactly what is required of them right off the bat, right? So the back and forth that we had before is eliminated. And users know where to start, and they start. There's no prereqs to knowing how to start. You come here and you go to work, right? And then again, if you'll notice down here is an example of what you get returned back. And so we're working with, again, the awesome nature of Salt to have async calls. And this is the job ID that gets returned back from Salt in itself. So the typical workflow, you'll post in to create some VMs. Oh, one nice thing to note too is, if you'll notice here, there's a start and end. So you can provision multiple VMs with a single API call. So if I needed 50 VMs for a specific workload, you could have 50 VMs created right in here. So you post those in, and then we'll come back to our job service as we talked about, right? So here's the endpoint where you'll put in a job ID, and then it'll spit back and tell you the status of it. So if it's still running, you'll see, hey, result, job still running, check back later, gives you your result. And then once it does return, it's removed here for brevity, but you'll get the job results here. So this is the nice endpoint that you can programmatically parse, and so you can get things like IP addresses or host names, and then you can start to interact with that VM if you need to. We also built in, let me jump into our templates here. We also built in, hold on, I guess I found some documentation updates I needed. So there's some fields in here that you don't see, but we built in a field for a bootstrap script, right? So Salt has the ability to, when you create a VM through Salt Cloud, to run a bootstrap script. So we put that functionality into the API. So within your provider here, excuse me, your profile here, you could provide a URL endpoint to any kind of bootstrap script you wanted. So this could be Salt. Unfortunately, our team wasn't using Salt as our config management tool at the time. We're using a different config management tool. So we weren't putting Salt on all of these VMs by default. But if a team was using Salt, or if they were using some other config management, or if they just needed to do some post config work in their VMs, they could put it in here. And so there was a field that said bootstrap URL, and you could pass that in. And there's a bootstrap args as well. And so if your shell script had some arguments that needed to be run, you could pass those in as well. And so you could do any kind of post configuration that you needed. So different teams could post in here. Oh, one thing I didn't note is that by abstracting, and I'll jump back over here, I guess, by abstracting Salt Cloud with a Python API, we're able to build some multi-tenancy into this. So we're an internal, our team, the core infrastructure team that I worked on, our customers, our end users were other engineering teams within the organization, and there's quite a few of them within NetApp. And so we were able to build multi-tenancy into here. So teams could provide credentials to their different cloud providers and share those just with their team members without exposing those or leaking over to other team members. And that was actually a large advantage and a really nice thing to have as we built this out. All right, so jumping back real quick, right? So we talked about the provider, the profile endpoint. We also had the provider endpoint, right? So that one's pretty straightforward. We went over that one again as well. You could put any number of providers in here. Driver is again going back to a different cloud provider you put in here, and then your credentials based on that. And there it is, right? And again, self-service. This is something end users can come to and understand. You have this model section within the Open API spec that allow end users to come in here and say, okay, what is the different fields that I have? What are their types? And I can interact with this without having to go back and forth. So did we have people still interact with us? For sure. We had people still coming to us, mostly for features now or for bugs, to understand, okay, hey, can we extend this to do different things? Can we have it, provision in a different way or add different metrics or things of that nature? And it was a great experience to have people interact with that. We had some different teams that actually wrote some SDKs for this, which was awesome. And so they contributed back to what we had done, and we're able to share that with the rest of the team members in the organization, to provide value across there. Yeah, so that's the story of our journey. Hopefully it's been helpful, and again, hopefully you focus on some of these ideas that we're able to talk about. Focus on your end users, learn from them, understand them, talk to them is the key. Gathering data and making assumptions is good, but talking to your end users and your developers and really understanding what their use case is the best. And starting where you were at, honestly, I think that's one of the best approaches. And you gain a lot of experience, you learn a lot of things. You set yourself up to be able to move quickly, then you can really be helpful and deliver value quickly. And that's what we learned. And the last one again is that Salt is a great tool. We love it, and it's been amazing to use, extremely helpful, easy to use in all its different forms, and easy to extend, and it's highly recommended. So I think with that, I think I might have went a tad bit faster, but I think I might pass this over to Ryan for a few comments here before we go into questions.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. In fact, I might jump in with some questions right now, if it's okay. This is a fantastic. Sure. Hold on one second. I'm being told that my audio is a little bit choppy. Are you hearing me okay, Jacob?
I can hear you.
Okay, just wanted to double check there real quick. A question for you. You mentioned that you chose SaltStack over other config tools. What led you? Talk a little bit about that research again. You mentioned that it was up to you and you had some experience with Salt in the past. What were some of the features of Salt that made you consider it?
Yeah, great question. So the different cloud providers, the Salt Cloud capability was the initial one that drew us in. Some of the other tools that we POC'd and tried to use for our initial use case, we were directly interacting with VMware, and the other tools were quite a bit more immature compared to what Salt Cloud had for VMware. And not only that, but I think some of the other providers weren't all available with the other tools. And so working through the process and investigating the different tools and then using Salt Cloud, their VMware provider was a lot more mature, and that really led us to start down that road, I guess, and the Python nature of it as well. So some of the other tools weren't written in Python. They were written in other languages, and we knew we would need to be able to extend this capability, and so that combined with the maturity of the different cloud providers really led us to pick Salt Cloud and SaltStack.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a combination of the API and the extensibility of Python and some of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. And then I just think this is a fantastic use case of how you've been able to save time, and that's really the sweet spot of what we go for at SaltStack is, helping you scale so you can focus your time and attention on more strategic things. It sounds like you spent a lot of time on provisioning these VMs, and that's, if it's not really what you went to school for, so to speak. Like you wouldn't want to spend that much time, right? Like the point is to free you up to do things that matter more.
Exactly. So it was a double benefit, I say, as well. Free ourselves up and we gain the value, and then you provide value to your end users as well. And so it was a double gain, I think, in our experience.
Yeah, as a service org, you're constantly looking to provide better service for your customers, and cutting that down by 3 weeks plus is huge.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. Let's just talk a little bit about this slide. I'll just talk through these next couple slides. I appreciate that, and then we'll go to some more questions if the audience has any. But first, just looking at this, SaltStack, we're all about scale. Everything in Salt can be performed via an API or through a GUI interface, and we provide role-based access controls, allowing you to empower users outside of IT, like developers or security pros as well, with granular controlled access. This is other stuff beyond what you presented, Jacob. This is beyond the API and beyond what you're doing. But you also talked about provisioning, and we go beyond provisioning, doing full lifecycle management for IT systems. And as you migrate to the cloud and do more in the future, you'll get additional support from Salt in various cloud environments. And across physical containers, networks, VMs, just like you talked about. And the same scale that Jacob talked about here also applies to NetOps and SecOps as well. We have a great use case with IBM Cloud where they were able to manage and update firmware on over 80,000 network devices. So not only are we talking about VMs and containers and servers, but network devices, and we even have a customer that's updating firmware on printers in a point of service, point of sale situation. If you want to go to the next slide, Jacob, I mentioned that we cover IT ops and NetOps, but we also have a new product that does SecOps, and the scale there is that you can scan your system similar to many systems and tools out there that do scaling or scanning for compliance. And when you run those scans for compliance, because we're config management and have access to each of the systems through those Python-based APIs, we can automatically remediate any out-of-compliance devices. So that's a new product. I just want to plug that real quick here at the end. And would love to discuss, how we can help you scale, you the attendee, if you have any questions about how you can scale across containers, VMware, or VMs, straight servers, network devices, etc. We can help you automate your infrastructure. So thanks for the time. If you want to go to the next slide, Jacob, contact us at saltstack.com/contact. And now we'll go back to any other questions that we may have.
Great. Thank you so much, Jacob and Ryan. We do have one question that came in. So audience, if you do have any more questions, please ask them in the questions panel. One question that we currently have is, how is Salt Cloud different when compared to AWS Cloud?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not 100% familiar with AWS Cloud, like their APIs, but in my opinion, they're similar, right? But Salt Cloud actually gives you more because you can interact with all of the different cloud providers, whereas the AWS Cloud obviously is just a single cloud interaction. So that was one of the use cases we found of value to use Salt Cloud. Was we had different teams that wanted to investigate or to use different cloud providers, and how do you provide that without having to write your own to each one? Well, Salt Cloud had already done it for us. I don't know if you had any additional things to add around that, Ryan.
No, I think you nailed it. That's great. Yeah, and then I guess there are a lot of tools out there that solve their own proprietary needs, like Windows or AWS or whatever. And if it's a pure play, then sometimes those work well. But again, if you want it faster and you want it to scale, Salt is usually a better solution. And I don't know how to word that without sounding like, oh, we're so great. I just think
Right.
that you really need to compare how long things take. And in IT, it's all about saving time and resources. So you may find a solution that works well and on a small scale, and that's fine. But once you scale, once you have multiple, many devices, you want to be able to get things done super quick, so you're not out there doing things one at a time manually.
Yeah, and I would add also the interaction matters too, in my opinion. So what is the interaction with a different tool or single cloud? What does that look like compared to what Salt Cloud's interaction looks like? And I think if you dig into it, you'll find that everyone's use cases are different, and there's always nuance to solutions, but the interaction with Salt Cloud is great. It's easy, it's straightforward, and like Ryan said, it's quick and it scales.
Perfect. That is the last question that we do have. So is there anything either you, Jacob, or Ryan would like to add?
Nope, just appreciate everyone who's been able to attend today. And if you have questions, we're more than happy to jump in and help you solve whatever use case it may be. There's many various use cases. There's a variety of ways you can use Salt, and would love to explore that with you.
Great. So with that, guys, I'd like to thank both Jacob and Ryan for a great webinar presentation today. I would also like to thank today's sponsor, SaltStack, for providing the audience with a great webinar presentation. And lastly, thank you to everyone who attended today. We hope you learned something new that will help you in your developer career. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.